The more you explain yourself, the more people stop taking you seriously. And the more you try to justify your choices, the more you slowly give away your authority without even noticing it. You think that by explaining, you are being clear, respectful, even mature. But in reality, you are training people to question you, to doubt you, and worst of all, to expect that you owe them an explanation every single time you act. And most people never realize this. They go through life believing that clarity equals respect, that if they just say things the right way, people will finally understand them, accept them, maybe even value them more. But that moment never comes, does it? Because no matter how much you explain, there is always another question, another doubt, another layer where you feel like you need to prove yourself again. And if you're honest with yourself, you already feel it. That subtle exhaustion after conversations where you talked too much, where you tried too hard to be understood, where you walked away feeling smaller instead of stronger, replaying everything in your head thinking, maybe I should have said it differently, maybe I should have explained more. But deep down, you know it wasn't about what you said. It was about the fact that you felt the need to say that much in the first place. You're not explaining because it's necessary. You're explaining because you're afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of being judged, afraid of losing approval. And that fear is exactly what people can sense, even if they don't consciously realize it. There's a quiet signal hidden inside over-explaining, and that signal says, I'm not fully certain about my own position, so I need you to validate it for me. And the moment that signal is sent, the dynamic shifts. You are no longer standing as someone who decides, you become someone who seeks permission. And once people place you in that position, it's very hard to get out of it. Think about how often you catch yourself doing this in small moments, not even big ones, just everyday situations. When you say no to something but then immediately follow it with a long explanation. When you make a decision but feel the urge to justify it before anyone even questions it. When you sense a slight tension in someone's reaction and rush to fill the silence with more words, more reasoning, more defense, as if silence itself is dangerous, as if being misunderstood for even a second is something you must fix immediately. That's the pattern, and it's subtle, but it's everywhere in your life, shaping how people see you, shaping how much they respect your boundaries, shaping how seriously they take your words. And here's the uncomfortable part you probably don't want to admit. Most of the explanations you give are not actually needed. They are not asked for. They are not required. They are simply a reflex, a conditioned response built over years of trying to be accepted, liked, and approved of. Somewhere along the way, you learn that being questioned is a threat, and the way to neutralize that threat is to explain more, to clarify more, to make sure there's no room left for doubt. But what you didn't realize is that by removing all doubt, you also remove all mystery, all weight, all authority from your presence. Because people don't respect what is constantly explained to them, they respect what stands on its own without needing validation. And right now, if you look at your life, there are probably specific situations that come to mind immediately. Moments where you felt like you had to defend your choices, maybe with family, maybe with friends, maybe at work, maybe in relationships, where instead of simply stating what you decided, you felt pulled into a long justification, almost like you were on trial, trying to present enough evidence to be accepted. And maybe in the moment, it felt necessary. Maybe you even convinced yourself it was the right thing to do. But afterward, there was that lingering feeling, that quiet dissatisfaction, like you gave away more than you should have, like you exposed something that didn't need to be exposed. That feeling is not random. It's your awareness trying to tell you that something is off, that the way you're handling these situations is costing you more than you think. Because every time you over-explain, you're not just using more words. You are lowering your perceived value. You are signaling that your decisions are open for discussion, that your boundaries are flexible, that your stance can be negotiated if someone just pushes a little harder. And there are always people who will push harder, not necessarily because they are bad, but because human nature tests limits. It looks for openings. It responds to signals. And when you consistently show that your decisions come with explanations, you teach others that your no is not final, that your choices are not solid, that with enough pressure, you might bend. This is why you sometimes feel like people don't respect your time, your boundaries, your decisions. It's not always because of them. It's because of the pattern you've unknowingly created, the pattern of explaining instead of deciding, of justifying instead of standing firm. And I know part of you resists this idea because you don't want to be seen as cold or rude or distant. You don't want to become someone who just shuts people down without care. And that's where the confusion begins. Because you've been taught to associate silence with arrogance, brevity with disrespect, and certainty with ego. But that's not the truth. The truth is, there is a difference between being cold and being composed, a difference between being rude and being clear, a difference between shutting people out and simply not overexposing yourself. Right now, you're not struggling because you explain. You're struggling because you explain too much, too often, and for the wrong reasons. You're not doing it from strength. You're doing it from fear. And fear always leaks through, no matter how logical your words sound. So the real question is not, how do I explain better? The real question is, why do I feel the need to explain at all in situations where my decision should be enough? Because once you start asking that, you begin to see the pattern more clearly. You begin to notice how automatic it is, how quickly it kicks in, how it tries to protect you from discomfort by pushing you to talk more, clarify more, justify more. And that's where the shift begins, not by forcing yourself to say nothing, but by becoming aware of that impulse in the moment it appears, that urge to fill the silence, that discomfort when someone doesn't immediately agree, that tension when you feel misunderstood. Most people run from that feeling. They rush to eliminate it with words. But what you're about to learn is that this feeling is not something to escape. It's something to control. Because the moment you stop reacting to that impulse, the moment you pause instead of explaining, the moment you allow silence to exist without trying to fix it, something changes in how people perceive you. It's subtle, but it's powerful. The dynamic shifts from you trying to gain their approval to them trying to understand you. And that's the moment where everything starts to turn. But most people never reach it because they never sit long enough in that discomfort to see what happens next. They break too early, they talk too soon, they explain too much, and they reset the cycle all over again. So if you're still here, if something in this feels uncomfortably accurate, then you're already ahead of most people, because you're starting to see the pattern for what it is, not as a personality trait, not as just how you are, but as a behavior that can be changed. And in the next part, you're going to understand exactly why this behavior exists, how it's wired into human psychology, and more importantly, how to start removing it without becoming someone you don't recognize. You've been conditioned to believe that more explanation equals more control, but the reality is the opposite. The more you explain, the more control you surrender. And if you don't break this pattern now, it will quietly shape every interaction you have for the rest of your life, without you even noticing it. Because here's the first thing you need to accept, brutally and without comfort. People don't respect clarity as much as they respect certainty, and those are not the same thing. Clarity is what you give when you want to be understood. Certainty is what you project when you don't need to be questioned. And most of the time, when you're explaining, you're not actually clarifying. You're compensating for a lack of internal certainty, even if you don't consciously feel it. And that's why the more you talk, the less grounded you appear. Because grounded people don't feel the need to over-communicate. They state, and then they stop. They don't rush to fill silence. They don't chase agreement. They don't adjust their message mid-sentence just because they sense discomfort in the other person. And that's where you need to start shifting, not in what you say, but in what you tolerate. Because your problem is not communication. Your problem is discomfort intolerance. You cannot sit with the idea that someone might not fully understand you, might not fully agree with you, might even misinterpret you, and because of that, you rush to correct, to soften, to explain. And every time you do that, you reinforce the exact dynamic you're trying to escape, where you are the one adjusting and the other person is the one evaluating. And once you see this clearly, you start noticing it everywhere, especially in situations where the stakes feel emotional. Like when someone questions your decision, even slightly, even indirectly, you feel that internal pressure rise, that subtle tension in your chest, and your instinct is to release it through words, to explain your reasoning, to make sure they get it. But what you're actually doing in that moment is signaling that their understanding is more important than your position, and that's the mistake. Because the moment you prioritize being understood over standing firm, you lose leverage, and people feel that. Even if they can't articulate it, they feel the shift in energy, the shift from someone who decides to someone who negotiates. And once that happens, they start pushing, sometimes subtly, sometimes directly, asking more questions, challenging more, testing more, not because they're trying to dominate you, but because you've shown them that your stance is flexible, that it can be influenced, that it's open to discussion. And this is where most people get trapped. They think the solution is to explain better, to be more logical, more detailed, more precise. But that only deepens the problem, because you're still playing the same game, just with better arguments. And the game itself is what's costing you power, not your performance in it. So instead of trying to win through explanation, you need to step out of the need to explain in the first place. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because it requires you to let go of control in a different way. Not control over the situation, but control over how you are perceived. You have to accept that not everyone will fully understand you, not everyone will agree with you, and some people will even judge you based on incomplete information. And you have to be okay with that, because the alternative is far worse. Constantly over-explaining, constantly adjusting, constantly leaking your position just to maintain a sense of temporary comfort. And that's not strength, that's dependency. Dependency on approval, dependency on validation, dependency on being seen a certain way. And the moment you see it like that, you realize why it's so draining. Because you're not just communicating, you're performing, you're managing perception in real time. And that takes energy, a lot of it, and it never ends, because there's always another person, another situation, another moment where you feel the need to explain again. And that's why you feel mentally exhausted after certain interactions, not because they were complex, but because you overinvested in them. You gave more than what was required, more than what was asked, and more than what was beneficial to you. So now let's break this down into something you can actually use, something you can apply immediately, starting with the first rule. And this one will feel simple, but it's not easy. Stop explaining decisions that don't require approval. And you need to define that clearly for yourself, because right now, you treat too many situations as if they require approval when they don't. Choosing how you spend your time does not require approval. Setting a boundary does not require approval. Deciding what you will or won't tolerate does not require approval. And yet, you treat these moments as if they do. You treat them as if they need to be justified, as if someone else has the authority to question them. And the moment you shift that perspective, everything changes. Because you stop entering conversations from a defensive position. You stop preloading your statements with explanations. And instead, you start with the decision itself. Clean, direct, and without unnecessary layers. And yes, this will feel uncomfortable at first, because you're breaking a habit. But that discomfort is exactly what you need to build tolerance for. Because that's where your power is. Not in perfect wording, but in your ability to hold your position without collapsing into explanation. Now, the second rule builds on this, and it's about how you speak, not just what you say. Replace explanations with statements, and this is a shift in language that reflects a deeper shift in mindset. Instead of saying, "I don't think I can make it because I have a lot going on and I'm really tired," you say, "I won't make it," and then you stop. You don't add more. You don't fill the silence. You let the statement stand. And what you'll notice is that the conversation changes. Sometimes the other person will ask for more details, sometimes they won't. But either way, you are no longer the one over-giving. You are no longer volunteering extra information to justify your position. You are responding, not overcompensating. And that distinction is everything, because it shifts you from reactive to controlled, from defensive to composed. And the more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. The more you start to feel the difference in how people respond to you, because statements carry weight, explanations dilute it. And now, the third rule. And this is where most people fail, because it requires emotional control, not just awareness. Let people sit in the discomfort of not fully understanding you. And this is the part that triggers your instinct to explain the most. Because when someone looks confused, or slightly dissatisfied, or even mildly judgmental, you feel that urge again. That pull to clarify, to fix, to smooth things over. But this is where you have to pause, because not every reaction needs to be managed. Not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected, and not every silence needs to be filled. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. Just hold your position and let the moment pass. Let them process, let them interpret, let them sit with it. Because when you do that, you create space. And in that space, something interesting happens. They start to come toward you. They start to ask, to engage, to try to understand on their own. And that reverses the dynamic completely. Now they are the ones investing. Now they are the ones seeking clarity. And you are the one deciding how much to give. And that's the position you want to be in. Not controlling the conversation through words, but controlling it through presence, through restraint, through the ability to say less and still hold more weight. And this doesn't mean you never explain anything. That's not the point. The point is that you choose when to explain. Instead of feeling like you have to, you explain when it serves you, when it adds value, when it's necessary, not when it's driven by discomfort or fear. And that's the difference between someone who communicates from power and someone who communicates from insecurity. One chooses their words, the other is driven by impulse. And right now, if you're honest, you've been operating more from impulse than intention. But the fact that you're seeing this now means you can change it. And once you start applying these rules consistently, not perfectly, but consistently, you'll notice something shift, not just in how others respond to you, but in how you feel internally. More stable, more grounded, less reactive, less dependent on immediate validation. And that's the real goal. Not just external respect, but internal control. Because once you have that, everything else follows. Your words become sharper, your presence becomes heavier, your boundaries become clearer, and you no longer feel the need to constantly explain yourself just to feel okay in a conversation. And that's when people start treating you differently, not because you demanded it, but because you stopped giving them reasons not to. Everything comes down to this, not your words, not your intelligence, not even your ability to communicate, but your ability to stand in your decisions without feeling the need to dilute them for the comfort of others. Because the moment you stop explaining yourself unnecessarily is the moment you stop negotiating your own value. And that shift is quiet but absolute. It doesn't need an announcement. It doesn't need validation. It shows itself in the way you speak less but mean more. In the way you stop chasing agreement and start holding position. In the way you no longer rush to fill silence as if silence is something dangerous. Because now you understand something most people never do. That silence is not empty. It's pressure. And the one who can hold that pressure without breaking controls the frame of the interaction without saying a word. And if you really look at your life up to this point, you'll start to see a pattern that was always there but never fully clear. Every time you over-explained, you didn't gain respect. You lost a piece of it. Not dramatically, not in a way that was obvious, but gradually, subtly, in ways that showed up later when people felt more comfortable. Questioning you, interrupting you, pushing your boundaries, and you wondered why. You thought maybe it was them. Maybe they just didn't respect you. But now you see the deeper layer. Respect is not something you demand. It's something you signal, and you've been signaling uncertainty without realizing it. Not because you are uncertain, but because your behavior has been conditioned to seek approval before it stands firm. And that's the habit that ends here. Because from this point forward, you stop asking for permission in conversations where you already have authority. You stop volunteering explanations that were never required. You stop treating your decisions as if they are open to debate when they are not. And this is not about becoming rigid or aggressive or detached. This is about becoming internally anchored so that your words are no longer driven by the need to be accepted, but by the clarity of what you've already decided. And once you reach that point, something changes in how people experience you. They can feel it before they understand it. The difference between someone who is trying to be understood and someone who simply is. And that difference is what creates presence. Not volume, not persuasion, but certainty. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself. The kind that doesn't react to every raised eyebrow or every moment of confusion. The kind that lets people sit with their own interpretations without rushing to correct them. Because you no longer see misunderstanding as a threat. You see it as neutral, sometimes even useful, because it filters out people who require constant access to you from those who respect your boundaries without needing a full explanation. And this is where the real power begins to show. Not in controlling others, but in no longer being controlled by their reactions. Because that's what over-explaining really is. It's a reaction, a reflex, a way to manage how others see you in real time. And when you remove that reflex, you remove their leverage over your behavior. You become less predictable, less reactive, more composed, and that changes everything. because people adjust to the level of certainty you present. If you appear unsure, they question. If you appear firm, they adapt. And most people never reach this level because they are too busy trying to be liked, too busy trying to be understood, too busy trying to smooth every interaction into something comfortable. But comfort is not what builds respect. Tension does. Controlled tension. The kind you create when you say less than expected, when you don't over-deliver explanations, when you allow a moment to hang without rushing to resolve it. And yes, not everyone will like this version of you. Some will feel uncomfortable. Some will interpret it as distance. Some will even try to provoke you into explaining again, to pull you back into the old pattern. But that's the test, and how you respond in those moments determines whether this becomes a real shift or just another idea you understood but didn't apply. Because it's easy to agree with this concept when you're alone. It's different when you're in a conversation and the pressure is there, when someone questions you directly, when there's silence after you state something, when you feel that familiar urge rising again. That's the moment that matters. Not the theory, not the understanding, but the execution, the pause, the decision to not fill the gap, to not add more, to let your original statement stand as complete. And every time you do that, even if it feels uncomfortable, you reinforce a new identity, one that doesn't collapse under social pressure, one that doesn't trade clarity for approval, one that doesn't need to be constantly explained to be valid. And over time, this compounds. It builds into something solid, something people can feel even before you speak, because your energy changes, your pace changes, your reactions slow down, your words become more deliberate. And that's when you start to notice a different kind of response from others, less questioning, less pushing, more acceptance, more attentiveness, because now there is a weight behind what you say, not because of the words themselves, but because of what you no longer feel the need to add. And this is the final rule you need to lock in, the one that ties everything together. If you want to be respected, you must be willing to be misunderstood. Not completely, not always, but enough that you are no longer controlled by the fear of it, because that fear is what drives over-explaining. And as long as it's there, it will find ways to show up in your behavior. But once you accept that misunderstanding is part of the process, not a problem to eliminate, you gain freedom. The freedom to speak less, to hold more, to decide without defending. And that freedom is what most people are unconsciously chasing without realizing it. They think it comes from saying the right things, from having the perfect explanation, from being able to convince anyone of anything. But the truth is simpler and heavier at the same time. Real power is not in how well you explain yourself. It's in how little you need to. And most people will never understand this. They will keep talking, keep justifying, keep oversharing, thinking they are gaining ground when they are actually losing it, slowly, quietly, in ways that accumulate over time. But you don't have to follow that path. You've already seen the pattern. You've already felt the cost. And now you have a different option, one that requires less effort but more control. Less words, but more weight. And if something in you shifted while going through this, don't just move on like it was another piece of content. Go back and run it again. Not to hear it, but to internalize it. To catch the moments in your own life where this applies. To practice the pause. To replace the explanation with a statement. To let silence do its work. Because this is not about motivation. It's about recalibration. And once that recalibration happens, you won't need to remind yourself to stop explaining. It will feel unnatural to do it. And that's when you'll know the shift is real. Not because you said something different, but because you finally stopped saying what was never necessary in the first place.